Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're sorry we're a little bit late, had some technical difficulties. We've been pretty fortunate with Zoom up to this point, but one of those things, it's technology, right? I want to thank Mark for taking his time out of what I know is a very busy schedule today to talk with us. And I also want to thank all of y'all for being on the call. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Robbie McAfoose, our chair this year for the Bay Area Houston Economic Partnership, and he's going to do an introduction for Mark. So, Robbie, take over.
Thank you, Bob, and welcome everyone. Thank you for your patience and for hanging in there with us while we got this thing started up. And I always like to share a little something about BAHEP at each general membership. And so before we get started, I'm going to share a little known fact. And in the legislation that Congress passed, to be known as HR 748, also the CARES Act, there were two sentences in section 3610 titled Federal Contractor Authority, two little tiny sentences. And those sentences helped this region in a great deal. There were many people across the country developing those provisions, and BAHEP, and in particular Bob Mitchell, were part of that nationwide team. But more importantly, they were instrumental in making sure our Texas delegation understood the importance of those two sentences to the Bay Area region. So great job, Bob, and thank you and your BAHEP team. So now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. It's my great pleasure to introduce Mark Geyer. Mark is the 12th Center Director of JSC and has held that position for almost 2 years now. And he has really good timing despite this current pandemic. It's a wonderful time to lead JSC. NASA and JSC are making great strides towards exploration. And over these past 2 years, Mark's guiding hand has been instrumental in the decisions and actions that are moving us forward. Prior to being Center Director, Mark was a Deputy Program Manager of Constellation Program. He was the manager of Orion, the spacecraft that's going to take us to the moon and on to Mars. And he spent time as the Deputy Center Director and as an Associate Administrator at headquarters. And I know firsthand that Mark is the right leader for JSC during this time. If you remember, back in February of 2010, it was announced that the Constellation program would be canceled along with Orion and SLS. And I just happened to be a part of Mark's contractor team on Orion at that time. I got to see firsthand Mark's leadership in a crisis. He guided Orion through a tremendous time of uncertainty. He kept us focused on building the vehicle the country needed rather than worrying about what might happen. He led us to successful pad abort tests and continually worked to keep our people focused on what was possible in the current environment rather than worrying about what might be. Orion and SLS would not have been restored back into the budget without his leadership and his team's progress continuing to move Orion forward. So Mark, you're the right leader for this crisis too, and it's our pleasure to have you address the BAHEP membership today. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you, Robbie, and Bob. Thanks for that great introduction. I appreciate it, Robbie, and I was blessed to be a part of that team and appreciated your part of that team. It was stress, but a lot of fun, especially when EFT1 flew. Let's see, a couple things I would like to say. First, I want to appreciate Bob inviting me to come today. I really appreciate, and those of us at JSC really appreciate what Bob and Bay Area Houston Economic Partnership have done for this region, and also for NASA Johnson specifically. You know, Bob is a tireless proponent of space, human spaceflight especially, and of what JSC does. And so I always appreciate his wisdom and his insight in what's happening around the world, and it's great for us to continue to communicate. So Bob asked me to kind of give you an overview. He mentioned a lot of people in this call might not know a lot of the background, so I'm kind of going over, what I'll do is go over the whole current plan, where we are today, the launches we have coming up, then our plan to go back to the moon, and then I'll talk a little bit about where we are with the virus and our startup plan. I do have to leave at about 5 till, so I'll try not to take all of the time. with my speech, and then hopefully we'll get to some questions that I know were provided or have been provided. So good. Thanks again, Bob. So this is our first chart. One of the things we like to say at Johnson is the giant leap start here. Of course, that's a paraphrasing, taking a bit of Neil Armstrong's speech and turning it into what we think Johnson provides for NASA and for the country. So, and as Robbie said, I've been blessed to be the director now for 2 years. And if somebody said you're going to be the director and you're going to have a 35-day furlough and then a pandemic, I would not have believed them. So it's been a real challenge in these 2 years, but also a lot of exciting things happening too. So next page. So there we go. So I think most of you know JSC. We sit in this region here in the Clear Lake area. It's about 10,000 people, a little less than 3,000 civil servants, the rest contractor team. We also have a facility at White Sands in New Mexico. That's a little inset of them in New Mexico, very close to Las Cruces. They do awesome work really with mostly hazardous stuff, propellant testing, so that's kind of, they're out in the middle of nowhere, as you can see in that picture. So they're a great part of the NASA team, and they're a satellite really of JSC. Next page. So my team did is we created first, and I forgot to put that in here, but we did create kind of our, what I would say is our motto, Dare, Unite, Explore. We dare to push our boundaries. We unite with our partners to create bold missions, and we explore for the benefit of humankind. And so that's really what Johnson is about. And then we also focused a little bit on the areas that Johnson provides that are really unique to NASA and also to the world. And so these are the different areas that really make up what Johnson does. We revolutionize the human experience in space. That's all a part really of putting people in space and in increasing their ability to perform and execute the mission. So space medicine, human factors, spacecraft design, that's all part of that. Exploring new destinations now is about Johnson's ability to lead in defining the architectures, the strategies for the future. Something we've always done, something we're very proud of. Propel the space economy is something that most people see as relatively new. It's always been part of our job, but that's where we believe that part of our job in doing these missions is to enable companies and United States companies to create capabilities that, one, help NASA do its mission, but also can compete in the world market. So how we do our jobs can allow us to propel the space economy. We also create game changers. In other words, as we hire and train and bring people into NASA, we're creating people that make a difference and leading globally. That's another thing that NASA does, and Johnson especially. It's not just going into space, but leading the world and bringing other countries along with us. So those are the things we believe we're good at, and those are our focuses as we go forward. If you go to the next page, I'll talk a little bit about the mission. So the International Space Station has been inhabited for 20 continuous years. It's incredible. So there are people on the planet who have been alive and they've never had a day where there wasn't an American in space, which is quite an achievement. The International Space Station, we do experiments, science 24/7, and then we also do many other research areas, including many on the how the body behaves and changes into space. This is just some example. We do a lot of extravehicular activity, meaning we go outside of the space station, both to do science and do maintenance. We had a lot of those in this year, and one of the unique things that happened this year is we had the first all-female spacewalk. There's Jessica and Christina. You see Christina on the left, and also Christina stayed on orbit. She transitioned between spacecraft actually and stayed longer, just a little bit less than Scott Kelly, but she did an awesome job, and she's back home. It was great to see her land and come back home a couple weeks ago. Next page. So we have a new crew on station, and the guy in the middle is Chris Cassidy. He's the American, And then we have Ivan and Anatoly, who are his Russian counterparts. They are now on space station. They are the three only that are up there. And that's because we are very close to hopefully getting back to launching Americans on American spacecraft. So if you go to the next page, I want to show you a little bit. The International Space Station not only does incredible research, but it's also where we are, as I was saying, propelling the space economy. The space station buys its cargo delivery services from two companies right now, SpaceX and Northrop Grumman. They both have capabilities in delivering cargo to space station. SpaceX is actually has return cargo capability. And we have a contract with Sierra Nevada to provide cargo on their spacecraft. You see that small plane-like spacecraft in the future. So we have three companies contracted. Two are actually flying today, delivering cargo. And again, this was all about how we procured that service. We bought it as a service rather than NASA owning the design, and it allowed these companies to create capabilities they can sell to other people. And you can see SpaceX using the capability they developed under this program to actually compete in the world launch market. So it really gave them their start. We are about to embark on having crew also delivered to space station using commercial partners. And there are two companies doing that. SpaceX, you see their Dragon in the middle, and Boeing, the Starliner on the right. So we have two companies about to deliver Americans and actually international crew members from the US to the ISS. And the next page, we are very close to actually launching our first mission. So this is Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken. They are the first two NASA astronauts that will fly in a commercial crew mission. They're going to fly on a SpaceX mission called Demo-2 to space station. The current targeted launch date is May 27th. I think there's a reasonable chance that they will hit that. We have a couple more issues to work through, but I have a sense that we'll be there. We're getting into all the big meetings, getting ready to certify for flight. So we are really close. If you go to the next page, you can see their flight hardware. There's the Dragon on top. It has a trunk, which also delivers cargo in the back there with the lines on it. So that is their spacecraft, and it's being final tested. And again, we're looking forward to a launch at the end of this month, which will really, really be incredible. It's the first time we've launched Americans from US soil since 2011, which was the last shuttle flight. Go to the next page. Okay, so let's talk about the moon. When the president came in, he and the vice president developed something called Space Policy Directive 1 through the Space Council. And this was for us to lead an innovative and sustainable program of exploration with commercial and international partners to enable human expansion across the solar system. And starting with what we're doing in low Earth orbit, we're going to lead that mission onto the moon. So I think a couple pieces in this are, one key piece to me is sustainability. We know that this is an exciting and important mission, but it also has to fit in the budget that we're going to be given, and we know the budget continues to be tight. So NASA understands that we're going to build systems that we believe are reasonably affordable to do these missions. If you go to the next page, so that's the direction we were given. We haven't been to the moon since the 70s. The moon gives us a lot of things. It allows us, for certain parts of a Mars mission, allows us to actually prove out technologies and capabilities. For example, living on another planet, even though the gravity is a little bit different, it allows us to get used to living on a different orbiting body. As I mentioned, no other country in the world has the capacity to lead such a thing, although China would love to. So this really establishes American leadership again on the next big strategic target, which is the moon. So that's really, really important. And it's really important for our plan to allow international partners to have a key role. And that makes them feel like they're part of the plan and makes them want to join us, which is exactly what happened on the International Space Station. It inspires the next generation, certainly going to the moon, and inspired me, and I know many are inspired by what we're doing on space station. It drives changes in science and technology. Again, depending how we buy things, it can change our US global impact, like I mentioned about what has happened with SpaceX, and it broadens our industry international partners. So let's go to the next page. So it's a lot. Again, I mentioned we go to the moon before Mars because it's a lot of things we can try in around the moon, which is 5 days away, you know, depending on where you are. Of course, you go to Mars, you could be a year away. So it's a lot that we'll start learning when we're closer than it would be if we were at Mars. So if you go to the next page. The administrator came up with this really good idea that since we're going to the moon again, he named it, and it's been accepted as the Artemis program. The Artemis, of course, you might remember your mythology. Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo and got us to the moon. So it's very, very appropriate. And so this really personifies our path to the moon, where we're going to return astronauts, NASA astronauts, to the moon. And one of the things that Jim has pointed out very clearly, and that is because we have a very diverse astronaut corps, that not only will we be sending the next man, but the first woman to the moon. And so that's all part of what the Artemis program is about. Next page. Okay, so Artemis is, the plan to the moon is really divided into two pieces. One is, the first part is really focused on the Vice President's goal of getting to the South Pole by 2024. And without going into too much detail, the South Pole we find is a very interesting region to go to. It has areas that are permanently shadowed, which means there's probably a lot of ice. And that ice, of course, has hydrogen, oxygen, which can be used both for water, certainly, but also to turn into fuel and also power. So that's our target. If you go to the next page, so that the first phase one is all about getting back to the moon, into the South Pole. So we call this the swoosh chart, as you can imagine, because there's a swoosh. The key parts at the beginning are really having a rocket and a capsule system, much like Apollo did, and that's what SLS and Orion are, and I'll talk about those more in a bit. And then the next part is having a lander that can join those two and then go to the surface. I do want to show, I'll talk more about those, but if you look at the bottom, we're starting by actually sending some small payloads, again, really science payloads, to explore this region before we send people back. And I mean the South Pole. We've never been to the South Pole. And there's other things we would like to learn about that area. It actually is really fascinating, but it's actually going to be more difficult to land in. Some other specific challenges. So sending science instruments and rovers there will be really, really important. And part of that is we're sending small payloads. And another way that we're doing that is Johnson is leading an effort to, again, procure lunar landing services. So we put out a thing that said, hey, we know companies, there's several small companies that are interested in delivering payloads to the lunar surface. So we put out a proposal, or put out a request for a proposal. We got several companies that clearly have the capability to do that, and we've awarded a few contracts now. The first one I think lands in 22, where we'll actually be sending payloads to the lunar surface. And again, since we haven't done for a very long time. Of course, NASA has been sending things to Mars, which is really a lot harder. But we need to go back and learn about how to explore these particular regions in the moon. And that's what I like about this commercial lunar payload services. It gives a chance for new companies to try and take some risk. And again, we're building more capability. We're building more space capability in this country, which is really, really important. So if you go to the next page, again, I mentioned you got to have a rocket and a capsule. Actually, let's skip one. Let's go one more, since we're a little short on time. So to get to the moon, it takes a lot of energy. You might remember Apollo, and if you look at Apollo and you've seen the rocket at Rocket Park at JSC, that Saturn V rocket is enormous, and that's because it takes a lot of energy to push the capsule system to the moon and get it back home. So on the left, you see this picture of the Space Launch System, which is that large rocket with orange middle, and the Orion on top. SLS is the only rocket today that has the power and capability to deliver Orion and our astronauts to the lunar region. So there's a lot of other rockets out there that are doing a great job, but none of them have this capability to get our crews to the moon. So the good thing is, as the vice president threw the gauntlet down and say, I want to go to 24, well, we would have no chance if we didn't have Orion and SLS about ready to fly. So and Orion, of course, is the only spacecraft capable of flying to the moon. And we have spacecraft now that are going to ISS, space station, but space station's 200 miles away. And the moon is a lot farther than that. And so again, you can get home from space station in about 30, 45 minutes. It takes 5 days to get back from the moon, depending on where you are. So it gives you a sense for why the spacecraft are different. Next page, I'll show you a little bit about Orion, which that's another picture of the Orion spacecraft from the front. And Orion is led and developed here at Johnson. I kind of think of us as the spacecraft people. Really, we're the folks that know how to design and build and fly piloted spacecraft. And there's a picture of the actual Orion for our next mission, which will fly in 2021. So it's a beautiful spacecraft, all done, all the testing's done. And there's a couple, we'll turn a couple of bolts and turn it over to the ground ops guys in a month or two. Even though we're completely done, they're kind of waiting on the rocket at this point. So anyway, great picture. Next page. Johnson's also responsible for doing the spacesuit. So if you're going to go outside, either outside space station or on the surface, you need a spacesuit. And Johnson is leading the development of a new spacesuit that will be used both for upgrade for the station, but also for the surface of the moon. And you see some pictures of it there. In the middle is actually some people in an NBL trying some things in the NBL, trying out a suit. So we have several designs, and we're going out with procurement on a production version of what we're designing. Next page. So the lander, very exciting program. You know, Orion gets you to the orbit, but you got to get to the surface of the moon. We're buying the lander in a new way. Again, a commercial opportunity for teams. We had 3 very innovative designs proposed. We actually had several, but 3 were awarded. These are the 3. There's Dynetics, SpaceX, and the national team, which really, interestingly enough, has Lockheed, Blue Origin, and Northrop Grumman as the big guys proposing on that one. So very interesting, very different teams, which would be great for NASA, very different ideas. And so those were just awarded. It's run out of Marshall Space Flight Center, but Johnson will have nearly 100 people participating in that program, and some key leadership roles. Again, I think really focusing on the ascent and where the crew lives and works. And of course, integrated operations of all of these are led by JSC. If you go to the next page, I think I'm going to skip this in the interest of time. So good discussions about the science we're going to talk about. I want to skip this page too. So now I'm going to talk about phase 2. Phase 2 is more about sustainability. So you can go to the moon, but how are you going to operate in a way that allows you to stay? So this swoosh chart is really an update, and it shows, one, on the bottom, more increasing capability on the lunar surface, including the ability for astronauts, once the lander has landed, for them to explore the lunar surface. And you need things like a lunar terrain vehicle, which is kind of like an unpressurized rover, similar to what they did in Apollo, but of course, an upgrade with the technology we have today. That is another program or project, I would say, that's led out of Johnson Space Center. So small, but very important. In the top, you'll notice the gateway. We call it the gateway. You'll notice an aggregation of elements. Gateway is some modules around us, orbiting around the moon at a high altitude. It allows us to, one, have Orion and logistics arrive so we can do longer and bigger missions to the lunar surface, up to 4 people. It also allows us to reuse elements like the ascent module of the lander. So, and that's a big part of being sustainable, is you can reuse things, and having a hub in orbit allows you to do that. It also is key because our international partners are very interested in the gateway, and they're going to help us provide key parts, including habitation elements and other parts, other systems. So it's not only part of sustainability, but also part of our partnership strategy. If you go to the next page, I think, yeah, there it is. On the far right is kind of the bus. It's the thing that keeps you in orbit with the solar rays, also provides power. Then there's habitation elements in the middle, a logistics element that's pointing out perpendicular, and then Orion on the far left. So Gateway is another program managed by Johnson Space Center. It leverages off our partnership and International Space Station experience. That elements are already in production, and the first elements of that will launch in 2023. So while we're going ahead and landing on the surface, we're also building an orbital platform around the moon that allows us, like I said, to live and work there in the long run. Next page. And I think, I'll tell you what, let's keep skipping. That's enough, I think, at the high level. Very exciting stuff. I would like to go to the COVID. It's like several columns. Keep going. Yeah, let's go that one right there. So, Johnson, yeah, geez. Let's see if I can go over one more minute and then we'll ask questions. So, this is too complicated for me to walk through at the moment. I would say, given where we are, and we have stay-at-home orders, right, for in this region, and and we're all still tracking the number of cases. Johnson we are open because we have work that has to happen 24 hours a day. Controlling space station, get ready for the space station flight. I just mentioned demo 2 for SpaceX is about to fly, so we're doing all that flight readiness. I mean, we are busy all the time. So about 10% of the workforce actually has to come on site. The rest can do their work teleworking. But there's some things that are not getting done. But in general, 10% come on site. Now, we are in the process of following the federal guidelines to figure out how we can increase the on-site presence. And so there's 3 categories of data that we're looking at. It includes hospital beds and ventilators. There's another one that includes a regional assessment of the number of people who have flu-like or COVID-like symptoms. This is something that ER folks record. And then the positive case counts in our Harris County region, for example, is a 3rd data set. And we use all 3 of those to determine whether things are getting better. And depending on if they're getting better, I can move further to the left on this chart and get closer and closer to getting most of the people back on. So we have a lot of work to check our office buildings to make sure we can socially distance people. I think that's going to be a bigger challenge. Conference rooms are going to be a challenge. So the good news is we never really closed, so we can gradually build up. The hard news is, though, I think it's going to take us a while before we're back to where we were, and actually we may never be. Maybe we don't need to be exactly where we were before, because we're also learning how to do a lot of these things remotely that we didn't think we could do before. So I'm going to stop and have a couple of minutes for questions. Again, sorry we started late, but I think my government computer was the one that threw up on this. So I'm on my home computer, so being at home, so we'll see. So I'm ready to answer some questions. Oh, should I just look at the question and read it?
No, that's okay. I will help you out with that. So one of the questions that we had relates to the antibody testing. Does that change people's ability to come back on site, or does that have any effect with a positive antibody test, somebody that might have recovered from COVID-19 versus everybody else that may not have had it?
So we are really lucky here at Johnson that we have flight surgeons, and we have a lead medical tech authority, Dr. Terry Taddeo. So he does a great job of interpreting for me, I'm just an engineer, what these CDC guidelines are and the effectiveness of these measures like masks and so forth, and also how this testing is going. So what my understanding is, this antibody testing, and there's several different kinds, it's very hard to tell what it means at all. So the only thing I can say, if you actually tested positive for being sick with COVID, there's a recovery time. And if you've passed that, then what has to be done for you to get back on site is to have a medical professional say that you're okay, or have a negative test. So we've laid out those criteria, and they're on the website, and you can see those. So an antibody test, in fact, I wouldn't recommend that in any way take them, because what it means is really fuzzy. But it's certainly not something that we would accept as a reason that you can come back on site. I guess let me say it clear in that way. yeah, so sorry, but that's
All
what we
right.
know.
And then I have a question that, given the agency's awards on HLS last week and JSC's position as the lead for the development of the Ascent element, how do you see the work for those projects being distributed across the different centers, and how much is going to be done there at JSC?
Yeah, good question. So again, it's the lead center is at Marshall. So, and there's a lot of propulsion, right? A lot of that stuff will be done at Marshall. The work, we are the lead for, I would say, the crew compartment. So what I call the piloted vehicle part of the lander. And in some concepts, it actually separates. So there's an ascent module. In some concepts, they're always together. So it's a little more complicated. But our experience is really in the human interaction and the human element of design. And so we are the leads for that in all sorts of ways, both in design and human factors and flight ops and all those things. And we'll always be responsible for the operation of those elements. So also each of these providers has the opportunity to request NASA people to help them with specific things, not just oversight, but actually help them develop things. And so we're getting those requests now from these three, and especially one of the companies, I expect we're going to have some really good work from them too. So we're going to have a key role for sure.
All right, great. Well, Mark, I know that you have a deadline here and a hard out that I'm assuming that alarm was for.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and let you go. I think that Bob's going to come back on and talk to the membership for just a second. But thank you so much for your participation today.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry I had to run. Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Robbie, for the intro.
All right, Bob, and you're on.
Okay. All right. Well, again, I want to thank Mark for all that great information, and we apologize again. It was running a little bit late, but that's technology, right? I do want to say, if there were some questions, Jimmy, that were sent in that weren't answered, we'll make sure that we get an answer to them, because we know who sent them in. We'll make sure that you get an answer to that. I do want to say, Robbie, thank you for the great introduction for Mark. And he is right. Robbie's right. He is the right leader at the right time. I really enjoyed working with Mark. I've worked with a number of them, but Mark is special. I do want to say, next Thursday at 2 o'clock, we're going to have a small business meeting. We'll have 3 of our members talking about some of the issues that they're facing in the small business community, but also have Tim Jeffcoat, the district director of the SBA, will be on the call as well. And he's willing to take a lot of questions. Going to talk about a lot of the webinars, a lot of things that they have to offer. So that should be a very, very informative meeting. So if you can make that meeting, the invitation will be coming out in the next couple of days. So keep an eye out for it. Other than that, stay safe. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll talk soon again. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.